All the classics of Mahayana Buddhism are not what the Buddha said, but fabricated by heretics. After they were introduced to China, in order to gain the approval of the Chinese people, Mahayana Buddhism kept stealing the essence of Taoism and Confucianism and turning them into their own things. The deception became more and more deceptive. Powerful. Kidnap Buddha. When the Buddha lived in the world, he never wrote any scriptures. It took 150 years before his disciples sorted out the scriptures and recorded them on palm leaves. Due to long-term wars and campaigns to destroy Buddhas in history, many Buddhist scriptures have long since disappeared. Disciples of later generations began to fabricate a large number of false scriptures. As long as I heard this way, the fake scriptures will be included in the Tripitaka. At the end of the school, I risked the dissatisfaction of the world, just to restore the innocence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and the justice of the Buddhist friends. False Buddhism is actually a branch of Brahmanism. All Buddhist scriptures were not written by the Buddha himself, but fabricated by later disciples. After 150 years of word of mouth, it can be said that the first Buddhist scriptures are not pure. A large number of Brahmin disciples mixed into Buddhism, replacing the teachings of Buddha with Brahmanism. After the Buddhist scriptures were introduced to China, they became a mixture of Brahmanism, Taoism, primitive worship, and Confucianism. It is absurd and deviates from the original statement of Sakyamuni Buddha. There are so many Buddhist scriptures that few Buddhists can read them all, and even fewer can understand them. Many of the existing Buddhist scriptures were fabricated by later generations. Because these people did not understand Buddhist principles, they made up random ones, causing inconsistencies, and making people dizzy when they read them. Buddhist masters had no choice but to adopt Wang Jinglu's method of studying scriptures. Buddhism is a study after the conclusion, not a conclusion after the study. The Buddhist Tripitaka is very messy, and there are often many different versions of the same thing, and the preface does not match the postscript. Since it is said by the Buddha himself, it should not be contradictory in any case. Some Dharma masters really don't understand the Tripitaka, so they can only advertise that they are dedicated to promoting the Pure Land Dharma, and then fool the believers. A single Amitabha Buddha's name is the general summary of the 12 scriptures of the Tripitaka. Since few Buddhists have the ability to read the Tripitaka, I can only follow what others say. Why is the Tripitaka so messy? Because in the Tripitaka, there are several copies of almost every scripture. For example, how many vows Amitabha Buddha made? Some say 24 vows, 36 vows, and 48 vows. There are too many ancient books, all of which are in classical Chinese. Why not translate Buddhist scriptures into vernacular? Its real purpose is not to let you understand. Because if you translate it into vernacular, you will see that it is messy and full of mistakes, which is unbelievable for normal and rational people. Mahayana scriptures, from an academic point of view, are absolutely apocryphal. At the beginning of the Buddhist scriptures, it is necessary to write "so I heard it." It shows that the collection of scriptures collected by Venerable Ananda is what he heard and received before he personally inherited the Buddha. But Venerable Ananda only lived to be 120 years old, and the Mahayana scriptures appeared one after another 250 years after the death of the Buddha. It is to deceive the world and steal the name, to deceive all living beings. Under the long-term influence of false Buddhism, Buddhists take the false as the real, live a life of self-deception and self-righteousness, and do not know that they have been deceived until after their death. There is no Western paradise for rebirth, and there is no merit in practicing fake Buddhism, and even because of ignorance, a lot of new evil karma has been created. Sincerity is exchanged for heartlessness, and what one sacrifices one's life and wealth in exchange for is a sin, completely collapsed, and cried unfortunately, it's too late. Reprint, Demystifying the 2,000-Year Deception of Mahayana Buddhism in China. Author, Swaneo Zhuangzi. The Mahayana Buddhism in China for 2,000 years is not the true Dharma taught by Sakyamuni, but a heretic. Almost all the scriptures of Mahayana Buddhism are false and fabricated by later generations, such as Abhitamsaka Sutra, Surngama Sutra, Miopaloda Sutra, Enlightenment Sutra, Buddha says Amitabha Sutra. They are all fake, but they all impersonate Sakyamuni. Modern science is prosperous. World religious scholars have revealed the truth from many aspects such as archaeology, technology, and historical materials, but Mahayana Buddhism refuses to admit it to the death. Their deception is still continuing, and I don't know how long they will continue to deceive. One of the most important classics of Mahayana Buddhism, the Abhitamsaka Sutra, admitted at the beginning that it was taken out by Nagarjuna Bodhisattva from the underwater dragon palace. Many Mahayana Buddhist classics come from the dragon palace, not from Sakyamuni Muni himself spoke. Mahayana Buddhism was produced 200 years after the Buddha passed away. After the Buddha passed away, Buddhism began to split into many sects with different views, and eventually formed two major factions, Theravada Primitive Buddhism and the popular Mahayana Buddhism. The original Theravada Buddhism is loyal to the teachings of the Buddha, inherits the original scriptures spoken by the Buddha himself, and practices according to the law, while the Mahayana Buddhism of the mass department breaks the precepts. Due to the criticism and testimony of the elder monks of the original Theravada Buddhism, in addition to seeking protection for their own violations and in order to develop more believers, so as to obtain more financial support, these Mahayana Buddhists in the public department forged a large number of Buddhist scriptures and mantras to compete with the original Theravada Buddhism advocated by the Buddha, and referred to Theravada original Buddhism as Theravada Buddhism. At present, the original Buddhism of Theravada is mainly distributed in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Thailand, including the Dai people in China, while the Mahayana Buddhism of Dashong is mainly distributed in China. These Mahayana Buddhists use apocryphal scriptures, Mahayana classics, and statues, Amitabha Buddha statues, medicine Buddha statues, etc., as tools to take advantage of the sickness of the world who are eager to heal their illnesses, women's fear of death and the old man's mentality of long life, as well as the weakness of idol worship, and use all means to deceive the masses of believers. The original Buddhism taught by Sakyamuni is despised by Mahayana Buddhism as Hinayana Buddhism. Thailand's upper block primitive Buddhism was introduced as early as the time of Ashoka in India by a mission sent by Ashoka. At the same time, Qin Shi Huang in China killed all the members of the Ashoka mission. Later, Buddhism was introduced to China again during the reign of Emperor Ming of the Han Dynasty, and the Chinese at this time did not know that it was fake Buddhism that was introduced this time. One mistake for 2,000 years. The main classics of Mahayana teaching are Prajna Sutra, Avatamsaka Sutra, Myopa Sutra, Infinite Life Sutra, Nirvana Sutra, Victory Garland Sutra, Unraveling Deep Secret Sutra, Langa Sutra, etc. But these scriptures are not recognized by the original Buddhism of the upper block. The main scriptures of primitive Buddhism in the upper seat are the Agama Sutra and so on. Mahayana worships Amitabha Buddha and Guanyin Bodhisattva, and primitive Buddhism worships the original 7 Buddhas and Maitreya, and does not recognize Amitabha Buddha. In Mahayana Buddhism, thinking about bad things is a crime, but in Shakyamuni's primitive Buddhism, thinking about bad things is allowed. As long as you don't do it, it is not a crime. It doesn't matter if you don't think about it intentionally. In Shakyamuni's original Buddhism, the Buddha rejected the proposal of the Sangha to be a vegetarian, and asked monks not to refuse meat when making alms. In Mahayana Buddhism, according to the practice of many heretics in India at that time, they also became vegetarians. Could it be that monk Jigong is from primitive Buddhism? The northern Mahayana Buddhism spread to China is all fake. If the Tathagata came back to life and saw the appearance of Chinese Buddhism, he would have to die of anger again. There is a key person here, the big sky of adultery with mother and death of father and mother. Famous historian Fan Wenlin. In a society where Indian separatism prevailed, it was natural for Buddhism to split among sects. About 100 years after the death of the Buddha, there was a big break between the two groups of the upper class, and the leader of the group was named Daishan. According to the Pasha Lun, Daishan was the son of a merchant. The merchant went away to do business and did not return for a long time. Adultery with mother. Later, when the businessman returned home, Daishan plotted to kill his father, and fled to Bosaliza with his mother. When he met the Arhat who had been supported, he was afraid of being accused, so he planned to kill the Arhat. Later, the mother had an affair with others, and Daishan was angry and killed the mother. Daishan knew that he was guilty, and heard that Buddhism has a law to eliminate crimes, so he went to Jiyuan temple to become a monk and receive precepts. According to the Buddha's Merit Sutra, if one person becomes a monk, he can build a pagoda as high as Brahma, a very high pagoda. It seems that if one becomes a monk, he will be forgiven for the behavior of beasts. Pashalun also wrote some new insights that Daishan said to his disciples, one of which is but wise people can say all kinds of dharmas and have to create scriptures. If you want to be authors, you can do whatever you want. After hearing this, the elders rallied together, thinking that your words are not Buddhism. The two sides had a big debate, and Daishan won the support of the majority, and finally won. Let me first talk about the difference between Northern Buddhism, self-proclaimed Mahayana Buddhism, and primitive Buddhism, Northern called Southern Buddhism, that is, the real Sakyamuni Buddhism. Can a dragon listen to the Dharma and become a Buddha? In the Buddhist scriptures of the North, it is mentioned that the dragon can become a Buddha, but the South Chuan does not accept this statement. Many Northern scriptures were obtained from Dragon Palace, but Southern scriptures do not recognize them as Buddhist scriptures. It is mentioned in the Ministry of Vinaya that a dragon took the form of a human to receive the monk's precepts to practice. It was discovered later and the Buddha told it to leave. Although it begged again and again, the Buddha explained that the dragon could not achieve any fruition. When it was still a dragon, it was too greedy and angry. Because of this situation, the Buddha established this precept. Anyone who wants to accept the precepts of a monk must confess that he is not a non-human. This is very clear that a dragon cannot become a Buddha and cannot hear the Dharma. 2. In Southern Buddhism, Sakyamuni said that one cannot become a Buddha without emotion, but one can become a Buddha with emotion. Later Mahayana Buddhism spread to the north, saying that one can become a Buddha without sentient beings, but one cannot become a Buddha with sentient beings. 3. The vegetarian problem. When the Buddha was alive, many of the heretics in India at that time were vegetarians. Devdatta once proposed 5 ascetic prohibitions, one of which was to ask the world-honored one to prohibit the Sangha from eating meat, but the world-honored one sternly refused. Begging for food wherever you go, how can you specify vegetarian food? The Supreme Being is blessed with heaven, how can he hinder the opportunity of the giver because he insists on vegetarianism? Moreover, the way of liberation is closely related to what is contemplated in the brain and remembered in the heart, and has no obvious relationship with what is in the stomach. Vegetarianism is not the teaching of the Buddha, it is the idea of the traitor Devdatta. Because of these things, the harmony of the Sangha and the operation of the Dharma will have been destroyed, and Devdatta fell into hell after his body was broken. These are recorded clearly and in great detail in the original scriptures and all Vinaya. Even the Buddha himself and the great arhats do not agree with the proposition of being a vegetarian, which belongs to heretics. The important thing is not to kill. As for the meat within the scope of the 3 cleans, it is edible. Monks all over the world, only Chinese monks don't eat meat. This is a commandment given by Emperor Wu of Liang, not Buddhists. Northern Buddhism says that eating meat leads to the crime of killing. In their karma scriptures, it is even mentioned that a person vomits blood because he eats meat. However, these are all magic words. Not the words of the Buddha. Although the Buddha abstained from killing, he did not require a vegetarian diet. The Buddha said that since there is no thought or action to kill, there is no sin in eating the 3 clean meats. Similarly, in the Dharma commentary, a monk asked the Buddha, if a hunter's wife presents her husband with a hunting weapon every morning, is she involved in the crime of killing? The Buddha explained, when she gave these hunting tools to her husband, she had no intention of asking him to kill, so she was innocent. 4. Mahayana Buddhism encourages self-mutilation, mutilation of body or limbs, and burning fingers to worship Buddha. When the Buddha was alive, he said, if a person has a disability, he is not allowed to accept the monk's precepts, and self-mutilation in Mahayana Buddhism is absolutely prohibited. The Northern missionary method encourages mutilated bodies or severed limbs, such as burning incense scars on the body or head, breaking or burning fingers, etc., to worship the Buddha. According to the Theravada, the Buddha does not allow this kind of practice. The Ministry of Vinaya mentioned that if a person has a handicap, the Buddha does not allow him to accept the Bhikkhu precepts. 5. There is no record about the release of life in the life of the Buddha. There is no theory of life release in the 10 virtues mentioned by the Buddha. If you look at the various teachings of the Buddha in detail, there is no theory of life release. The theory of liberating life was fabricated into the Mahayana classics by some Indians who forged scriptures of the Mahayana religion after the Buddha passed away more than 600 years ago, and newer false ones were continuously fabricated in the follow-up. Buddhist scriptures. Buddhist precepts require recluses not to lie, not to tell lies to deceive others. Therefore, if there are deceptive words in the scriptures and cannot stand the test of practice, then these scriptures can be identified as apocrypha. The apocryphal scripture fabricators of the Mahayana sect speak lies and mysterious words with the intention of attracting followers, defrauding fame and fortune, and defeating the original Theravada Buddhism advocated by the Buddha. Please look at the following apocryphal scriptures in the Buddhist scriptures of the Mahayana sect: the Lotus Sutra of the Myova Lotus Sutra, the 6th volume of the Medicine King Bodhisattva, the 23rd record in the book. This Lotus Sutra is also the same. It can free all living beings from all sufferings and diseases. It can untie all the shackles of life and death. If a person is sick, he can hear this scripture, and the disease will disappear immediately, and he will not grow old and die. This myth that sickness will be eliminated, and immortality will never die cannot stand the test of facts. 6. Who is creating myths about Buddha out of nothing? When the Buddha was alive, he promoted the primitive Buddhism of Theravada. The believers called the Buddha the teacher and the leader, but they never recognized the Buddha as the omnipotent God-man. Since the death of the Buddha, there has been civil strife within the original Theravada Buddhism, and the Mahayana sect has been split. The Mahayana sect has degraded the original Theravada Buddhism advocated by the Buddha as Theravadaism. Broke the precepts. They advocated that as long as the intention is good, you can violate any Buddhist rule, in order to attract more people to join the religion, so that they can get more people's money and support. They also invented the skillful means. The theory advocates that when preaching, the Buddha should be mythical, and the Buddha should be said to be as divine as possible. Through such fanfare and propaganda, the followers of Mahayana soon surpassed the number of people who were degraded by them as Hinayana. The Buddhist scriptures we read now, except for the Agama Sutra of Theravada Buddhism, which was not seriously tampered with by them, the other so-called Buddhist scriptures are all fabricated by Mahayana writers at will.